Hi guys, I'm Mark Zicree, Mr. Sci-Fi, also known as Mark Zicree of Space Command. But today we are starting a brand new podcast called Greenlighting Yourself. It's the title of the new book I'm writing that Silman James will be publishing, but we're also going to do a podcast where I interview some of my favorite people in film and TV to find out how they get television shows made, how they get films made, how they go from the initial concept to actually getting stuff on the screen where you can see it. These are the real people, the real movers and shakers. And I wanted to start first with my friend, and he's an incredible filmmaker. His name is Howard Cohen, and he is the head of Roadside Attractions, which has made some of the greatest films of the last several decades, including Judy, where Renee Zellweger won an Oscar for her portrayal of Judy Garland, Dear White People, Mr. Holmes, which had Ian McKellen playing Sherlock Holmes, on and on and on. We'll go into a lot of his credits in the interview, but I just wanted to let you know we're going to be doing these on a regular basis, Elaine and I, and you'll be learning scads about how you can get your films and your TV shows made. So without any further ado, here's the first episode of Greenlighting Yourself. Hello, Howard.
Hi.
It's
Well,
good to see you.
yeah.
And
Nice to see you too.
yeah, it's
in Matrix.
yeah, in the cyberspace.
Yeah.
Now we're starting a new podcast called Greenlighting Yourself, and as I think you may know that I've already sold that as a book. Where Silman James is going to be coming out with that book as soon as I finish writing it. But now particularly, I think it's very important that people find ways to be self-starters and find ways to make stuff happen, and sort of be the engines that drive themselves rather than waiting for the stars to align or someone to give them permission. So what this is intended to be is a series of conversations with brilliant, wonderful people who have really created yes who have created a body of work that is singular and worthwhile. So
we noticed a long history prior to your starting your own company of supporting the independent voice.
Yes.
Through directors, being in charge of independent film. What led you on this crazy journey in the first place?
Well, it's interesting, like many journeys in life, it happens not planned. If anyone asked me in, high school or college, will you spend your life working in independent film? I wouldn't have said anything negative. I just would have gone like, what is that? What is independent film? What does that even mean? I was a theater person in high school and college. And I thought I wanted to be a drama critic. And then my father was pushing me, as, suburban mid-century parents did, to try and be a lawyer. And I fell into a job in New York working for a television producer, but maybe like my second or third job after that in entertainment, I happened upon the independent film market in New York City, which I just read literally today. I think some part of it is shutting down, sadly. But the IFP was a seminal organization in New York, and I started going to their market where they showed independent films in the mid 80s. And I worked for Paramount, where they were just starting to look at, acquiring movies that they didn't make and, giving them distribution. And that was a somewhat new concept. There had been versions of it throughout time in Hollywood. I mean, United Artists in the classic era of Hollywood was a distributor, but not a financier. I mean, Samuel Goldwyn famously owned all of his own movies and put them out through UA, but that was a different definition of independent. It wasn't the independent that was born in the 80s, and then it's a different even independent from now, with the means of production much more available to everybody with iPhones plus. But in the 80s, it was my introduction to this idea that the do-it-yourself world, which is I think what you're talking about. My introduction to that and why it was exciting and what was interesting about it, and it was the introduction of a lot of new voices. It was by definition not mainstream. It was the era of Jim Jarmusch and Spike Lee and Donna Deitch and other people who are not as well known but were seminal, and Steven Soderbergh in the beginning. And I think that it's very interesting to look back on that. Some of those struggles we're still struggling with. Obviously, African American filmmakers and people of color and women. Some of the same struggles. We've made some leaps, but so I think I've always been interested in that. And it was what was going on in New York also. So I think, and I just spent my first 6 years in the business in New York. So I think the energy of filmmaking was very much about the independent world in New York, because the studios were in LA.
And well, it's interesting to look at to chart your journey, because it's Harvard, HBO, Samuel Goldwyn, Turner, UTA, and then forming Roadside. And so now how did you end up at UTA? What was that? Because were you an agent at UTA? Is that how your role?
So the brief trajectory is I had all this experience in independent film. I did decide that I wanted to come out to Hollywood, but I continued with the independent world. And the first job I got was working for Samuel Goldwyn, who was one of the sort of seminal indie distributors of the late 80s. And after that job, I did a brief stint in television working for the Turner Network. But an agent at UTA by the name of Dan Aloni, who's still a very prominent agent, came to me while I was at Turner and said, we want the big agencies to get into this field, into the independent world, and would you be interested in coming and starting this department at UTA? And I had to think about it, because it wasn't actually what again, it was the theme again being sort of opportunistic and things coming to you and not what you plan. And I thought, well, being an agent, I don't know if that's what I want to do. But the more they talked to me about it, and it was a very entrepreneurial job. It wasn't just booking people in writing jobs or directing jobs, which is obviously exciting, but was not what I wanted to do. It was really putting together movies. It was kind of an executive producer function, with having all the resources of an agency at your fingertips. So it was an exciting job and an exciting time. And I also was allowed to represent directors as a part of that, and transition some of them into bigger films after they made their first indie film.
I noticed that. Did you have any kind of conflicts with people who, you were wanting the independent voice, and then there were all those other people who said, no, I want films that look like that film. So did you encounter that much, or were you just sort of on a totally separate track?
Well, I think that there's always an overlap between what indie filmmakers do and what studio filmmakers do, and a lot of people claim that indie filmmakers are just people who haven't been given a lot of money yet, but I don't think that's actually fair or true, because I think that now, whatever it is, 40 years on, 35 years on, we can see there are people who've carved out real, true, independent filmmaking careers by choice. Yes. And then there are people who use Sundance as a launching pad and can't wait to sell out, so to speak. I think we've seen anything and everything in that regard. People who do one thing, go there, go back, So I don't think it's as cut and dried as that, I guess, is what I'm saying. I feel like there's overlap, there's resources, everything has its own orthodoxy. There became cliches in the independent world just the same way there became cliches in studio filmmaking. I don't want to say that they're equivalent, because they're different.
Yes.
But I don't think there's a value judgment that I place on one over the other. I think that's very short-sighted, and I try to not so much be agnostic, but see the value of both.
That's great. Now, one thing that, of course, all of the people who will be watching this have a story to tell, but in terms of how to actually get it to completion, often baffles the best of them. So
And by completion, do you mean completion in terms of
completion in
production
terms of
and release?
completion in terms of it actually being in front of an audience.
Yes.
So from the idea to it actually getting in front of the audience. And now it seems like there's a lot of upending with the way everything has shifted
with COVID. Yeah.
And so in terms of going from the idea to it being in front of the sort of people who would be the people who would appreciate the voice, what would you say is, do you have ideas for anything that would help people in that trajectory?
To navigate successfully
that.
in the present day.
Yes, in the present day.
I feel like it's sort of the good news, bad news. I feel like the good news is that there's still, you know, a huge interest in new voices, in independent voices, in people doing things that are original, that aren't like other things, movies and material that come from everywhere. So I feel like, you know, that's still the case, you know, maybe more so, but probably in a weird way the same, in that there's always been interest in people who are talented, who come out to Hollywood or send their movie, you know, get their first movie in Sundance, get their first movie seen some way or another. I mean, I think that I want to say less good news, but the truth is that a lot of the same things still have to happen for your movie, your career to take off, as has always had to happen. No more, no less. People who are gatekeepers still have to see your work and like it. Like, it's not that much has changed, in the sense that the gatekeepers are different, the methods of distribution are different, but it still comes down to the same thing. You know, because if you make a movie and you put it out on YouTube and no one watches it, that isn't, you know, probably what you had in mind. You had, unless you have some way of getting people to, I mean, YouTube as a model certainly has its proponents, but it hasn't really proved to be a great feature film methodology yet.
Yes.
And you guys would know more about it on the series side, but I think you maybe even the success that you've had on your series is probably the exception that proves the rule. I think it's pretty, I mean, you would know better than me, but I think it's pretty heavy lifting. And I think that, so I think you're still looking at gatekeepers. It's, you know, how do you find those gatekeepers? Again, not that different than it always was. They're the film festivals, they're the agencies, they're the indie producers, they're the, you know, they're all of the ways that that the people who distribute and spend money to market content find out about movies and series and shorts, and, you know, they're finding them out through gatekeepers, one way or the other, you know. And I think so again, I don't think it's either good news or bad news. I don't think it's it shouldn't be discouraging,
right?
And I think because, you know, people are breaking through all the time, and certainly this moment in time seems like a great one for diverse voices, for new, for you know, seeing people of color and LGBTQIA and other marginalized group and disabled and, you know, women and non-binary, et cetera, et cetera. It seems like a moment for that. But, you know, I think it's a moment for again, material that is good. I'm even in quarantine, I'm still seeing, you know, not that many, but like 6 or 7 features a week, you know, that are sent to us online, and they're all over the map. And some are really great, and some are terrible, and, you know, but the cream rises to the top very fast.
Yes.
When something is really good. The part that I've never subscribed to really in Hollywood, and this is my own bias, but, you know, I guess you could say I've spent my career relatively on the inside, not like a, you know, a macher, but someone who's worked at established companies, in established circles. I am not of the belief that there's amazing, fantastic work out there that has just been shelved and undiscovered. It's it's not my, that's my personal bias. I feel like there's enough places to go. If you send your movie to, you know, 600 film festivals and nobody wants it, that you sort of have to go,
Yeah, there's a bell ringing.
maybe,
Yeah.
because there's enough diversity, even in film festivals, you know, like there are film festivals for almost everything in the world.
Yeah.
So there's a way to get your movie seen, and if it's great, and of course that's 100% subjective,
Mhm.
but if it's great by any sort of, you know, standards that you or I would subscribe to, I feel like it will get seen. So I feel like there should be encouragement to young new voices, because I think there's still great opportunity.
So let's drill down on that a little bit and back up a couple steps, because as you know, Elaine and I run our roundtable and we mentor literally thousands of people who want to be part of the Hollywood dream, to be part of the you know, stellar choir that you and I and Elaine are all part of, the ascendancy. But what I find happening with a lot of people is they'll write a script. The script will be fine. It'll be okay. Let's say for a moment that they've done their work, because a script, of course, is very inexpensive to write. I mean, you just got to sit down and type and keep moving the words around until they actually work. But and so if you get feedback and so forth, it's not a huge expense out of pocket. But then the people who try to make those features, make those scripts, even as indies, the challenge they have is raising the money and attaching name talent, not necessarily A-list talent, but just talent that will get the attention, as you say. So, and I see often that they're pursuing the money, can't get the money because they can't get the name actors, can't get the name actors because they can't get the money. I call it circling the field. And so in terms of breaking that cycle, or essentially how does one kind of get a leg up on that cycle of frustration?
I mean, I'm not as in touch with all of the places where you can send your script, but I feel like there are a lot. There's there are again, you know, I don't want to make it sound like it's either easy or impossible. It's somewhere in the middle. But there's there's many organizations that have labs that take scripts.
Like Sundance.
Way to get your script seen, read, exposed. There's the blacklist. There's 4 or 5 imitators to the blacklist. And I think the other way to do it is to send at least an inquiry, if not the script itself, because some people won't take unsolicited, but to at least send query emails to, you know, producers whose work you like. And that doesn't have to be the most famous independent producer ever. It can be a producer who's had 2 movies at Sundance and who's a young producer. And those people are usually more accessible than some of the harder parts of it. So that's where I would start. I would always try and go along with somebody, and this is my own personal bit of advice, but I would go along with someone who has more experience than you and more context than you, but not by, like, you know, a country mile.
Right.
Like, not, you know, like, not have that huge, and if you have some access to the biggest producer in Hollywood, fine, and do it. I'm not dissuading, but my first instinct would be, again, somebody young, if you're young, or if you are of a certain, you know, like-minded person, or if it's a African-American project and you want to find an African-American producer and that makes sense to you, like, find a young one who's maybe made 1 movie or 2 movies. And those people are remarkably accessible. Producers are often looking for new material. Those people are, you want to find access points where people are excited to read new material, as opposed to being inundated with new material that they're never going to get to yours.
Great. That's great. That's great advice.
And I think that sending your script to, you know, Emma Stone's, you know, the 4th agent on her team, and expecting, you know, somebody to read it when they've never heard of you, it's just not really that logical.
Right.
So I think, you know, And, look, I guess on down the line, and someone's less famous, maybe they're less, but, we're experiencing a version of it, and it's not even easy for us because we're trying to package some projects for the streaming world. So we're sort of a little more on the outside in that sense. And, it's not, I mean, we get service, but it's not easy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, it was
Still, it's still banging the door. It's still sending the script. 3 weeks later, did you read it? 3 weeks later, did you read it? 3 weeks later, I'm going to move on to another person.
Right.
So I mean, that's still like the case.
Yes.
For us, and
Yeah.
we're a known entity in Hollywood in the feature side, but less so on the streaming production side. So
Yeah.
I'm already experiencing some of this on myself, and I know how hard it is.
Yes. So when you say on the streaming side, is that for feature length content or for series content?
Both.
I see. And so okay, ask the question you're going to ask, Elaine, and then I have one.
I was curious because moving into that field, I know I've heard that a lot of producers are no longer saying series or films, they're just saying content, and they're trying to find a suitable home for it.
Yeah.
The
portal.
The portal.
Yes.
And in terms of platforms, are you starting to get a sense of which of the new platforms seems to be more appropriate for your voice yet, or is that you're still feeling that out?
Well, we're going to pitch to everybody. I mean,
Yes.
we're not going to, I mean, what material are we attracted to, and where does that end up? It's going to be probably more streaming than network television. Although we've been developing a series version of Hello, My Name is Doris, the movie with Sally Sheldon. We took that first to the networks, and then we're going to also take it to the streaming companies too. So, it depends, but we're retooling it a little bit for the streaming companies. So they're going to be different. So I don't want to say we're agnostic. I think there are things that belong in different platforms. But I think as a producer, if you can, I think you want to be open to all of it.
Yes.
But your other point, I disagree from my little bit of experience, not huge, in that I think you want to decide if it's a long form one-off, or if it's a limited series, or if it's an ongoing series. I mean, these days, an ongoing series may only be 3 seasons anyway. So, I mean, you might as well, even if you're not, I mean, if you're sure it's literally 1 season, no matter what, then you might as well be honest about it. Most companies are more excited about things that can be like 2 or 3 seasons.
Yes.
Okay.
And just to interject, just some of the films your company has made: Manchester by the Sea, Dear White People, Winter's Bone, Mr. Holmes, Love and Mercy, and of course, as you mentioned, Hello, My Name is Doris. And the online it said that your films have grossed over $300 million, and you've gotten 19 Oscar nominations, and of course Renee Zellweger won for Judy, which was one of your company's films as well. So you guys have actually been creating a lot of very meaningful content. And so just for those listening saying, who is this guy? I think that's who that guy is. So and but were you going to say something, Howard? And then I have
No.
Okay.
Go going.
Yeah. Well, here's the other question I had, which is, see, I'm very fortunate because in science fiction, an actor can be in a show 20 years ago and still have a rabid fan base today, and so attaching talent to the projects I'm doing is not difficult at all. It's actually very easy. But again, there's the challenge in the indie film person, trying to attach talent. That's the other part of that equation. Raising money is one part, attaching talent is another part, and then getting the attention of the gatekeepers, as you were saying. So in terms of attaching talent, do you have any advice for the novice or the person who's just starting out in terms of that stuff?
I would always go for the manager rather than the big agency if the person has a manager, and go for a junior person at the entity if they're at a big management company. Typically, do your homework, try and figure out who. It's worth it, maybe, if even to subscribe to the studio system. It's expensive, but it might be worth it. And try and find out the junior person and send them an email. And again, I think the people who are trying to make their careers and discover material are more likely to want to read something. So if you go to a junior person at the management company where that actor is, you might actually get a response.
Great. And when you mention studio system, just let people know what that is, because some people watch.
Yeah, it's an app, and it's a subscription service that you pay for that gives you a lot of the executive names and contact information.
Great, that's terrific. So it's more useful than IMDb Pro or something like that.
Yeah, IMDb Pro is pretty good too. I feel like, can anyone? I don't even know the answer to this. Can anyone subscribe to IMDb Pro?
Yeah. If it's like $15 a month or $19.95, and it could be any.
I didn't know whether they had some, like, you had to have some affiliation or not.
No,
they're pretty good on reps, on up-to-date information on reps. They're less good on sort of like, the studio system has more information about like projects and development at places, and it's a little more business oriented. But IMDb Pro has pretty good information for people, and pretty well kept, pretty well up to date on the reps for actors and directors and writers.
And so now, when you started Roadside Attractions, you already had an established career. So do you feel that you had the contacts that you needed to then start your own company? In other words, the question I'm asking is something we really haven't talked about, is building that network of people that you can reach out to, that you can work with, that makes it so much easier to do everything.
Well, I think, I mean, the period in my career where I really built that up was the 7 years I spent at UTA, because that's one of the main reasons to go to an agency and be an agent, is especially if you don't want to be a career agent, which I didn't. Although I stayed longer than I thought I was, because I did like it. Me, I made enormous amount of contacts that are still, even though I've been gone from there for 16 and a half years there. By the way, a lot of the agents in the lit department are still there, who were there with me. Wow. It's a career with a lot of longevity. And I just, met a gazillion people. So that's certainly one way, doing an agency training program if you're very new to Hollywood and you're inclined to want to do that. I mean, I don't think it tends to favor people who are, right out of college. I mean, I'm sure they have a smattering of people who are starting later, but it's, not particularly well paid and grunt work. And so it tends to be focused on recent college graduates. Each of the big agencies have those training programs. I think that to some extent, and I'm on the fence about it, because my experiences with these things are limited, like all these seminars and things that you pay for to quote unquote meet people. I think those are mixed. Because I feel like you're meeting a lot of people just like yourselves, as opposed to the people you want to meet who can help you.
Yes.
That may or may not be true. Again, what you may find there are some of the more junior people who are trying to increase who are more on the inside, but are trying to increase their contacts. So it's possible. But I'm a little skeptical of those. The same way it's like, those, acting classes for actors can be, a dead end.
So you were a producer, you moved into just distribution for a while, correct? And then moved back into producing. What was that journey like?
Well, I was never a full-fledged indie producer, although I have a few credits, but they were things I kind of did on the side. I mean, I've always been an in-house executive, but my job but a couple of years of my job at Samuel Goldwyn, I was very much, producerial function in the sense of developing scripts. And then my 2 years at Turner was 100% development oriented. So I had some concentrated periods doing certain things along the production line. And then the 7 years at UTA were the packaging and the representation business, and then obviously the 16 years at Roadside are much more about marketing and PR and distribution, and somewhat about production. We haven't done that much production. We're now really trying to get into it much more for the streaming world, but that's fairly new. I mean, the one movie we were involved with from the very beginning at script stage, I mean, really in 16 years, was All Is Lost with Robert Redford. I mean, that was a script that the director of Margin Call handed to us at the premiere.
Wow.
And so we got involved at the very beginning. So we were, we visited the set, we did notes, we were very much producerial function. I'd say there are probably another 8 or 9 movies over the 16 years where we got involved where the movie was either in the middle of shooting or had just finished shooting. So Whitney, the documentary, hadn't started shooting yet, but we didn't really, it's a documentary. We watched a lot of cuts, but we didn't like collect the footage with, Kevin McDonald. So at Roadside, it hasn't been that much production oriented. Again, different now. We got involved in an independent, internationally produced television series where we were very much developing the scripts. It's called Professionals. It's premiering first internationally, and then hopefully it will find a home in the US, but it's first going on some networks in Europe.
Cool.
So what kind of material, if you were, just in terms of your own heart, what kind of things really grip you? Would you say in terms of theme or character? Are there things that you would say, I will champion that? It's always tough, but I will champion that.
I'd say, if I look at what I've been attracted to over the years, and if there's common themes, I mean, a lot of true stories. I think we've done very well with that. I think that, we program to a kind of 25 and older, big city, educated audience. And so, which I think is, somewhat programming to ourselves. We've had the luxury of that, with exceptions, certainly. But I would say, year in, year out, what we do more of is more to that audience, what I'd call like the landmark theater audience. So I'd say a lot of the things that are common to that are, movies that are realistic, that are based on true stories, that are, about adults, that have, that have kind of quote unquote kind of consequence in the world, or are emblematic of change in society, or have something, quote unquote, have something to say. So I'd say that's probably more so than, horror, action, broad comedy.
Right.
I would say sophisticated drama and sophisticated comedy. It's just smattering of genre in there. That's what again, I think we're trying to branch out as we go into the streaming world, and we're looking at other things. But in terms of the movies that Roadside releases and probably will continue to release for theaters, I would say that's more where our emphasis has been.
Yeah. Whenever I see distributed by Roadside when we were in theaters, I think, oh, this is going to be a good one.
Yes.
So
Thank you.
Pull that off, but
Thank you. Well, I think that's the lucky of it's both by choice and necessity. I think that it's how we've had movies that have succeeded because they're not big budget extravaganzas, and especially in the past 5 years, there's been a lot of pressure, well documented, on that segment of the marketplace. The studios aren't making dramas anymore. The studios aren't making romantic comedies anymore. Studios aren't making X, Y, and Z, and they're only making tentpole comic book action, franchise movies. And there's a lot of truth to that. So I think that we've been, that part of the marketplace has been squeezed, but a lot of it has been left more to us, because the studios don't find it lucrative.
And so now, in terms of that, the because you mentioned something that I vaguely remember. It's called a theater, and I think they were these big buildings that people used to get together in and watch a movie on a big screen.
And eat popcorn.
Yeah, and eat popcorn, and that's also a very interesting question, because of course now, what would have been theatrical releases are coming out on, like Charlize Theron's new movie just came out on Netflix and so forth, and that. So
well, that one actually was made for Netflix, but I know what you mean. The King of Staten Island was supposed to be in theaters Trolls was supposed to be in theaters. Greyhound was supposed to be in theaters. We have a movie opening a week from today that we were going to release in April, and we're putting it out on premium VOD called The Secret, which is based on the famous documentary of about 13 years ago about, it's sort of a, Tony Robbins self-help more, but with a huge fan base, and it stars Katie Holmes and Josh Lucas. And, it's a love story, and we were doing a wide release in April, and now it's being released in your home.
Yeah, and how's this hitting the profitability of those films that were intended for theatrical release? Does that limit the profitability of those films?
It can. It depends all on the specifics. What did the movie cost? What was there money spent already to release it theatrically?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that it's different in each case. I think for the movies like Tenet, I mean, I don't know. They were still. I think if it wasn't for Christopher Nolan, they probably would be considering a streaming release. But even so, they probably would have to take a big write down.
Right. Yeah.
It costs $200 million.
Wow.
Oh, wow. I was going to ask you that. What budgets generally do you favor? I mean, in terms of pattern budgets, I see that there's quite a range. But what?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of our movies are like in the 8 to 15 range.
Yeah.
I mean, we're seeing them usually after the movies have been made. So, unfortunately, sometimes for the financiers, there's not direct correspondence between price and value. But that's also worked in their favor, because now movies are selling for 10 times what they cost to streamers. So it's the revenge of the indie producer who, had to take scraps before. Now they can call the shots depending on the movie. Yes.
Now, another question I had was, there was a point at which you had just come out of Harvard and you were this young man with a great future ahead of him. Imagine if you were that same young man that you had been back then, starting out now. And let's say for a moment that you wanted to be a filmmaker, and you're just off the bus from Keokuk or whatever the COVID-19 equivalent of that would be. How would you go about starting from a cold engine? You've got a script under your arm. You have determination and drive. You're not going to stop. What would you advise your younger self to do in the modern day?
I mean, I don't think that different from what I was talking about earlier, but I think, look, I'm clearly you can see it from my resume and, whatever suburban background I came from, I gravitated towards sort of name entities, and that's not necessarily everybody. That's really me. I probably would submit it to this, depending on what it was. I would submit it to the Sundance Lab. I would submit it to the Berlin Film Festival, lab. I would submit it to a lot of those labs. If for no other reason, I'd get an early read from what does that world think of this project? Now, if it's a movie about, flesh-eating bacteria, that might not be the right way to go.
Yes.
So so I think it depends on what it was.
Yes.
Too. I would try. I think there's some submission process for the blacklist. I would do a lot of those things to try. I would try to get people reading it, get feedback, get people reading it. I would obviously register it with the Writers Guild, but I would get people reading it.
Yeah, and you mentioned that you're watching, film submissions, and obviously all of those people were able to pull together enough financing to make those films. So, are you encountering from these films that you're considering good, bad, or indifferent? Are you finding a variety of ways that they're financing these films? Are they, do you have a sense?
I mean, I think that the movies that have any decent budget, it hasn't really changed that much in the past. I'd say it's quite a while now, and even it predates streaming. I would say 15 years at least that, rich people are financing independent movies.
Huh.
They're equity financed. They're either, there's some conventional pieces of it, like there'll be a sales agent that will tell the rich person that, you have a strong likelihood of getting your money back, and that may or may not be good advice. But
Yeah.
so they'll, but you know, to the extent they're a really reputable sales agent, then they kind of stand by their estimates.
Hmm.
The better sales companies, you know, are much more choosy in what they take on,
Hmm.
and they'll say, you know, I really like this project and I think that it will sell. But there's a alchemy aspect to it.
Hmm.
But more and more, there used to be a model, and it's really now a long time gone, where you know, actor A plus actor B plus actor C, and your script, you know, equals financing. But that really is, I feel like that's almost entirely gone.
Wow.
And it's mostly a combination of equity, you know, and equity is fancy word for rich people. Um,
Yeah.
and then maybe some, you know, distribution money from a distributor, if not in the US, a couple of anchor distributors internationally. But those used to drive it, you know, in the heyday of foreign sales. There would be, you know, 40% of the budget would be able to be driven, you know, by actual sales to distributors. A
Mhm.
bank would cover a chunk of it, and maybe there would be equity for another chunk of it. So
Mhm.
it would all add up together. I would
Right.
say now, you know, like the bank financing is non-existent
Mhm.
and are very hard to get. Um, and there's still some possibility for some distribution financing, but the
Mm.
largest piece of it is coming from equity.
Well, so given that, when you're talking about sales agents, if someone's a young filmmaker, how would you suggest they do their due diligence to find out if a sales agent is reputable? Because there's so many that aren't.
Um, I think that one of the ways is usually, you know, some of these resources like, um, you know, the Find and the IFP, and I think a lot of those. That's where going to one of those seminars or talking, you know, you know, that's where you can, even if you're not going to make great contacts, you probably can find out a lot of that information.
Mm.
So that might be worth going to those seminars and, you know, places, because you can have conversations with people and usually find people who know more than you do. Even if they're not like the people who are going to help you get your movie made, they are people who know something more. They've been around a little longer. They can tell you about various sales companies.
Okay, well,
Great.
starting out again from the beginning, one of the things that we always stress to people who are trying to make it is attitude. You know, the attitude that you have towards yourself and the people around you. Uh, as you were rising, did you encounter people where you said, "Oh dear, they're never going to get anywhere with that attitude"? I mean, what would you say is
In terms of
in terms of
deportment,
deportment, in terms of connecting with your
don't be an
fellows?
asshole. Yeah.
Well, no, don't be an asshole.
Yeah.
But what would you say are some of the things that trip, especially young
Young beginners.
filmmakers,
Yeah.
beginners up? In terms
It's a really good question, and I think that you know, it's a balance. It's a really important balance. So you can't just say, oh, you know, I am who I am. It's a really important balance between being a self promoter, being relatively aggressive, and being kind and, you know, not sort of a flim flam person.
Mm.
So it's hard to strike that balance.
Mhm.
But you know, as someone who's spoken on 100 panels and, you know, learned very early, you know, I've probably spoken on more than 100 panels, very early to, like, you know, exit through the bathroom to get away from the horde of people who would come to me after the
Mhm.
seminar. Um, you know, because a lot of those people just don't know how to approach somebody.
Yes. Yes.
And I think you have to, you know, again, that we're now 35 years in the independent movement.
Mhm.
So I think it's different than it was. And I think I think that, like, accosting people in public is probably not the right way to go at all.
Right.
If anybody wants to be accosted in public, you know, some exceptions,
Yeah.
but you know, if you go to a panel and you see the executive from Netflix and you go there and start pitching your project to them, you're going to get a glazed look.
Right. Right.
So I think you still, you know, I think it's better to use these other kinds of resources. And
Mhm.
most people expect everything to come online now anyway.
Mhm.
I think in the early days, random queries on the internet were just that. But I think now everything's obviously on the internet. So I
Mhm.
don't think that there's any shame in that. But I think that, again, I would try and figure out where they're more likely to be interested in unsolicited
Mhm.
submissions, queries, trying to go after either places that explicitly ask for submissions,
Yes.
or sort of the younger people in the either in production companies, either in studios, in management companies. I think if you do your homework and figure out who are the sort of what I call the CE level, the creative executive, like who's at that level, those people are much more used to and welcoming to queries.
Mm-hmm. Great, great. So now I know we have to let you go in a moment,
Oh,
but
and yeah, 2
but so
minutes.
here's
2
yes,
minutes.
because we were told 45 minutes and out.
Yeah.
So but let's put it this way. So we've covered a lot of ground here, Howard, and but if you were going to give the most important advice you could give to someone to give them hope, to give them something that would allow them in their dark days to continue forward, what would you say to those multitudes of young people that don't know what they're doing?
Whose shoelaces may be tied together.
Yes, I mean, I can say this with genuine, feeling. I think that, you could easily be the next great, let's put it, content maker of, next year, and, absolutely don't give up. Be, I think that, you want to write something that you have. Don't write cynically.
Mm-hmm.
Write something that you're really interested in.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to say like write what you know. I think that's too much of a cliche. But write what you're sincerely interested in. What you would want to see.
Yes.
That's always the thing I always say to people, and that seems to be almost a revelation. Do not, and of course there are exceptions. If you're someone who wants to make programming for 2-year-olds, that's fine, because obviously the world needs that.
Mm-hmm.
But in general, write material that you would be interested in watching.
Mm-hmm.
That's the best advice I can give people.
Great. Well, I
And
think that
and people, and you vary from that at your peril.
yes.
And you are much more likely to succeed at doing something great.
Well, that's great. So, well, this has been great, Howard, and
Thank you
I think
for your time and your big brain.
and
Yes.
I'm sure you shaved years off the learning curve of the people who will be listening to.
I hope so.
Yes.
It was really nice to see you guys. Stay well. You look great.
Yes. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
You too.
Talk soon.
Take care.
Bye. Take care.
Bye-bye.